My name is Sarah Bennett, and I am 42 years old. I bought my dream cabin in the mountains, a $1.5 million sanctuary I worked decades to afford. But the day I moved in, my brother Ethan decided it wasn't mine at all. It was his personal vacation lodge. He brought 10 people, barged into my home without permission, and laughed in my face when I told him to leave. That was the moment I realized. Ethan had taken from me my whole life, and this time, I was going to end it, for good. If you've ever been underestimated or disrespected by someone who thought they could just take what's yours, then you'll understand my story. Stick with me until the end, because my revenge wasn't quick, and it wasn't simple. It was cold, calculated, and devastating. And if you like hearing stories of justice finally being served, make sure you subscribe, because I promise you, this one is going to hit home. I still remember the way the cabin looked that first afternoon. The wooden beams glowed golden in the sunlight, every knot and grain etched with stories I imagined for myself. The smell of fresh pine lingered in the air, earthy and warm, promising a life that had seemed impossibly distant for decades. Outside the wide glass windows, pine trees stood tall like silent sentinels, swaying gently as if bowing to the rhythm of the wind. Beyond them, the creek meandered lazily, water catching the light in ripples, whispering a lullaby I had imagined for years. For years, I had dreamt of this place, fantasized about it late at night, when my cramped apartment felt more like a cage than a home. I had survived on cheap takeout, buzzing with the neon lights of a city that never seemed to pause. My coworkers flaunted vacations, luxury cars, promotions that came with bonuses I could only hope to see. Meanwhile, I buried myself in endless deadlines, crunching numbers and coding into the early hours, sacrificing life itself for a dream no one seemed to notice. People said I was obsessed, and maybe I was. But it wasn't just about a cabin in the mountains. It was about freedom. Freedom from nagging relatives. Freedom from the suffocating judgment of people who never understood why I worked so hard. Freedom from myself. From the fear of never achieving what I wanted. And finally, after 20 relentless years in the tech world, I had it. I had won. The deed was in my name. Sarah Bennett, owner of a secluded mountain retreat worth more than I'd ever allowed myself to imagine. I was still unpacking the first box, holding a mug I'd brought from my apartment as if it were a talisman, when my phone buzzed. Ethan. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a fleeting second, I considered ignoring it. Old habits die hard, though. I swiped to answer. Hello? His voice hit me like a hammer. A familiar mix of charm and command that had always made me want to run and sometimes made me obey. We're coming to your place. 10 of us. 2 weeks. Get the beds ready. Food, blankets, the works. We'll be there in an hour. Click. The line went dead. My hand trembled slightly as I stared at the phone. 10 people. 2 weeks. At my cabin. My dream sanctuary. My half-unpacked, barely breathed-in haven. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. My hands gripped the counter so hard I left faint impressions on the wood. My brother didn't ask. He didn't even consider asking. The audacity, the entitlement, it was nothing new. That had always been Ethan, always commanding, always believing the world revolved around him, always stepping into my space without thought, assuming it was his right. Growing up, Ethan had been the sun in our house, radiant and unstoppable. I had been the shadow, quietly existing, watching, enduring. He was the firstborn, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in the eyes of our parents. I was the responsible one, though that responsibility mostly meant cleaning up his messes. When he borrowed my books and returned them shredded, I was told to be grateful he had shown interest in reading at all. When he drained the savings I had painstakingly accumulated as a teenager to fund his band, my parents reminded me that family comes first. And later, when his business ventures collapsed and he needed a lifeline, I handed over money I had worked for, because that's who Sarah Bennett was. She fixed things, quietly, without resentment, until it built up like a dam inside her. And now, he was trying to claim my dream. My chest felt like it was tightening into steel bands as I paced across the polished pine floors. The silence of the forest outside, now a weight pressing down instead of the comfort I had hoped for. Every beam, every window, every corner that had seemed so inviting a moment ago now felt like it was being invaded. Then, in the distance, Engines. 3 trucks appeared, kicking up clouds of dust that coated the winding dirt road. The blue pickup led the way, a chaotic pile of coolers, duffel bags, and what looked like camping gear teetering dangerously. Behind it, 2 more trucks followed, stuffed with people and noise, a caravan of intrusion. Doors slammed, boots crunched gravel, laughter bounced off the trees. Someone shouted, "This place is insane," and I felt my stomach twist. Ethan, grinning like a man who had just discovered treasure, spread his arms as if claiming the cabin for himself. "Sarah," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the clearing. "You hit the jackpot, sis!" I didn't move. The oak door stood between me and the chaos, the only barrier protecting a lifetime of dreaming from being trampled into dust. His fist pounded against it, rattling the frame, shaking the wood beneath my fingers. "Open up. We're starving!" I cracked the door just enough to meet his smug eyes. "Ethan, I'm not ready for guests," I said. He didn't even blink. With a shove that sent my breath scattering, he barged past me. Boots left mud trails across my pristine floors, and behind him poured 9 more strangers, each carrying noise and laughter like a weapon. They collapsed onto couches, dug through drawers, popped soda cans, and somehow my sacred retreat transformed into a frat house within seconds. "Stop," I said sharply, my voice trembling. "You can't just barge in like this." Ethan spun in the kitchen, arms wide like a conductor announcing a grand performance. "Perfect, guys. Look at this setup. She's got everything." He pointed toward the loft. "I'll take the upstairs. The best view for my coffee." Heat rose to my cheeks. "No, that's my space." His grin faltered for a fraction of a second, and then he shook his head, brushing it off. "Don't be stingy, Sarah. Family shares." That word, family, was a chain around my neck. Family was always his justification. Family had been the cudgel used to beat me into submission for decades. Family meant he could waltz through my life, destroying boundaries, demanding compliance, and I had no choice. But not this time. "This is my home," I said, steadier now. "You didn't ask. You need to leave." The laughter faded, leaving a heavy, charged silence. Outside, the creek babbled softly, indifferent, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Ethan's eyes darkened. "You're serious? After everything I've done for you?" I laughed softly, the sound bitter. Everything he had ever done for me? Borrowed money, ruined property, broken trust, drained my patience. That wasn't help. It was entitlement disguised as kindness. "This is my home," I repeated, voice resolute. "Leave." He scoffed but took a step back, just enough to flicker doubt across his eyes before the mask returned. "You'll regret this, sis," he muttered, dragging his bag toward the loft regardless. His friends followed, leaving cans on counters, muddy shoes on rugs, disruption in their wake. My blood boiled, and my hands shook as I slipped into the study and locked the door behind me. I dialed 911, my voice carefully measured, refusing to betray the rage and fear roiling beneath the surface. "There are people in my home who won't leave, about 10 of them uninvited. I need help," I said. The operator confirmed my ownership, promised officers would arrive in 15 minutes. Outside, Ethan pounded on the locked door. "Sarah, don't be ridiculous. We're family." His friends jeered, laughter echoing, trying to peel away my resolve, but I stayed silent. And then, in the distance, sirens cut through the mountain air. Panic flashed across Ethan's face for the briefest moment, replaced quickly by annoyance and bravado. Footsteps scattered, voices raised, chaos mounting as if the cabin itself had become a battlefield. And in that moment, clarity struck me with a precision that left me trembling. Ethan wasn't just intruding. He was declaring war, a war I didn't ask for, but one I was finally prepared to fight. Because for 20 years I had been silent. I had been the shadow, the caretaker, the one who bent so others could shine. And now, for the first time, I had the power to set boundaries, to defend what was mine. My sanctuary wasn't just a cabin. It was the culmination of decades of sacrifice, sweat, and obsession. And no one was going to steal that from me. Not even Ethan. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the thick forest shadows, bouncing off the cabin's wooden walls like a warning beacon. My heart hammered as I stood in the study doorway, watching Ethan's so-called friends scatter like roaches in the sudden glare. Bags slammed shut, soda cans rolled across the floor, and the laughter that had filled my sanctuary only moments ago transformed into nervous whispers, sharp and uncertain. Ethan, of course, didn't panic. He never did. He puffed out his chest, straightened his jacket, and plastered on that infuriating grin, like a man about to deliver a performance he'd rehearsed his whole life. I hated how familiar it felt. I hated how easily he could charm his way out of consequences. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser, boots crunching on gravel as they made their way toward the cabin. Relief flooded me, a wave I had been holding back for hours, for days even. But Ethan was faster. He moved forward first, hands raised in mock surrender, a polished display of innocence. "Officers," he said, arms wide like a host greeting old friends. "Thank God you're here," I froze. He wasn't panicked. Not even a little. This was theater, a show, and he expected them to buy it. "She's having one of her fits again," he continued smoothly, gesturing toward me with mock concern. "My sister, she's been under a lot of stress. She invited us up here and now she's changed her mind. I think she just needs some space." I felt the air go out of me. A fit, changed her mind, invited them? None of it was true. I had been ready for every challenge in the tech world, every backstabbing colleague, every impossible deadline. But this audacity, this betrayal by blood, it took my breath away. "That's not true," I said firmly, though my voice trembled. "This is my home. They showed up without permission and refused to leave." Ethan clucked his tongue like a parent scolding a child, turning toward the officers with a practiced ease. "Sarah, come on. Don't do this," he said, voice softening, begging with the same smile he used to manipulate everyone in our family. "She's always been high-strung, perfectionist type. You know how she is, officers. But she doesn't mean it." The officers exchanged glances, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. That hesitation sent a shiver down my spine. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if Ethan might actually win, if his smooth lies could erase the reality of what was happening before them. But then one officer stepped forward, voice firm. "Ma'am, can we see proof of ownership?" I had anticipated this moment. My fingers dug into the folder I'd prepared, hands trembling, heart slamming against my ribs as I pulled out the deed with my name in bold, black ink. The officer took it, scanning every line, then looked back at Ethan. "Sir, this property belongs solely to your sister. You and your guests need to leave immediately." Ethan's mask cracked, his smile faltered, jaw tightening, eyes narrowing with an intensity that could have cut stone. "Seriously?" he muttered under his breath. Then louder, "Seriously? After everything I've done for her? I helped raise her. I gave her everything." I swallowed a laugh that turned into a bitter ache. Helped raise me? Gave me everything? No. He had taken everything. My money, my patience, my peace of mind, every ounce of freedom I'd fought to carve out for myself. The officers didn't flinch at his theatrics. They gave him 10 minutes to gather his group and leave, warning of trespassing charges if they lingered. And then the cabin erupted into chaos. Voices rose, angry and bitter. Friends groaned and cursed, shoving items into bags. Ethan's face darkened with every passing second. He shot me looks like daggers, rage simmering beneath the surface. "Don't think this is over," he hissed as he finally stomped out, dragging his duffel bag like a sulking teenager. I didn't respond. I just stood frozen in the doorway, watching the trucks rumble down the dirt road, engines fading until only the creek's soft murmur remained. Silence reclaimed the forest, but it wasn't peace. Not yet. The cabin suddenly felt too big, too hollow. Their laughter still echoed in my mind. Muddy footprints marking the floors I had only just cleaned, like scars I couldn't wash away. Relief should have been all I felt. Instead, a hollow pit opened in my stomach, because Ethan wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat. That night, sleep became a stranger. I lay in bed, straining to hear the softest sound, half expecting him to appear in my doorway, his voice dripping with false innocence. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of wind through the trees set my nerves on fire. My sanctuary, the culmination of decades of hard work and sacrifice, felt vulnerable, exposed. And then the phone calls began. First, guilt. His voice carefully measured. "Sarah, you embarrassed me in front of my friends. Do you realize how hurtful that was?" Then anger, thinly veiled but undeniable. "You're selfish. You think you earned that cabin all by yourself? Who supported you all those years? Who was there when you were struggling?" And finally, threats. "You'll regret this, sis. I promise you'll regret shutting me out." Each voicemail landed like a stone in my chest. I pressed play with trembling hands, unable to delete them, unable to ignore the proof of his character. He was trying to instill fear, to remind me that no matter how far I went, he could still invade my life. Days turned into weeks. I tried to settle in, tried to breathe in the crisp mountain air, tried to convince myself that peace could exist here, but every shadow felt darker, every creak louder, every distant howl more threatening. The pines no longer whispered. They warned. Friends from the city called to congratulate me. I laughed with them, told them about the beauty, the serenity, the quiet of the mountains. I didn't tell them about the bat I kept near the bed at night, a talisman against the terror that lingered in my mind. I didn't tell them that sleep felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. Then, the sabotage began. First, my mailbox was ripped from the ground. Letters scattered across the dirt road like confetti at a parade I hadn't been invited to. Then, deep scratches appeared along the side of my car. Deliberate, furious marks that made my stomach twist with unease. But the worst was yet to come. One afternoon, I returned from a short grocery run to find my front door wide open. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But the presence was unmistakable. The air carried a faint cologne that wasn't mine. A beer can sat crushed on the counter. Upstairs in the loft Ethan had once claimed as his, the curtains were drawn, as if someone had stood there staring out at the view, claiming dominion over my domain. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just harassment. This was psychological warfare. A silent, calculated declaration. You may own this place on paper, but I can still walk in whenever I want. And I realized something chilling. The Sarah who had always bailed him out, who had swallowed her pride to keep the peace, who had been the silent caretaker in our family, was gone. Ethan had declared war the moment he had turned my dream into his playground. And now it was my turn. I wouldn't let him win. Not this time. Not ever. And I knew, with a cold, unwavering certainty, exactly how I was going to end it. For weeks after that break-in, I lived in a constant state of tension. Every creak of the cabin walls, every gust of wind against the windows felt like Ethan lurking just beyond the tree line, waiting for a chance to pounce. I slept with a bat by my bedside, phone charger always full, motion sensor lights installed all around the cabin's perimeter. I checked locks obsessively, made sure every window and door was secure, and avoided opening the front door to anyone I didn't know. I even drove the long way around the mountain when I had to go into town, refusing to let him know my routines. But deep down, I knew these were just band-aids. Defensive moves. Ethan wasn't the type to be scared off by a few lights, or even by the police. He was entitled, determined, and dangerous in the way spoiled men are when they believe the world owes them something. He didn't respond to reason, didn't answer to logic. His life was built on convincing people that rules and boundaries didn't apply to him. I had to think bigger. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of blood red and molten gold, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, a cup of black coffee cooling at my elbow. I stared at the blank page, pen hovering, mind spinning. The light outside was fading, and the shadows inside the cabin seemed to stretch longer, creeping along the polished floors. If Ethan wanted war, I would give him war. But unlike him, I wasn't sloppy. I wasn't impulsive. I wasn't going to stumble into his chaos. I was methodical, patient, calculated. I began writing. Everything. Every incident. Every voicemail. Every threat. Every piece of proof. The mailbox ripped from the ground. The deep scratches along my car. The crushed beer can left on the counter. The break-in itself. I cataloged it all, line by line, as if I were building a legal case file, because that's exactly what I was doing. And with every word I wrote, my anxiety began to transform into focus, into a plan, into control. Ethan believed he could manipulate me because he always had. Since childhood, he thought his charm, his twisted logic, his family-first guilt trips would keep me under his thumb. And for 20 years, it had worked. But charm doesn't stand up in front of cameras, in front of police reports, or in the cold, unyielding light of documented evidence. Evidence stands up, and that's what I was going to give him. The more I thought about it, the more the plan took shape. First, I bought cameras. Hidden ones, small, discreet, and powerful. I positioned them around the property, inside and out, perched on tree branches like watchful owls, tucked into corners of the porch, placed strategically inside the cabin where he had lingered before. Tiny, nearly invisible, streaming in real time to my laptop. Every angle of the house covered. Every step he might take captured. Second, I stopped answering his calls. I wanted him angry. I wanted him reckless. And sure enough, the voicemails piled up, dripping with frustration and entitlement. His voice, once polished and smug, now cracked, revealing cracks in the facade of control he had always relied on. You think you're better than me, Sarah? Living in that cabin all alone? You don't deserve it. I'll make sure you don't keep it for long. I smiled quietly to myself, sipping the now cold coffee. Perfect. That was exactly what I wanted. Desperation. Impatience. Recklessness. Third, I dug into his finances. He wasn't careful with money, and I knew it. My years of bailing him out had left breadcrumbs, a trail to follow. I pored over online records, tax filings, and small claims court documents. Unpaid debts, failed business ventures, lawsuits filed against him by former employees and business partners. Every misstep a weapon in my arsenal. He was crumbling, desperate for control. And my cabin had become the shiny, untouchable trophy he thought could solve all his problems. But I wasn't going to let him have it. Not this time. Not ever. The final piece clicked into place one night as I listened to his latest voicemail. He sounded drunk, slurring words, rage simmering just below the surface. I'll be back, sis. And next time, you won't stop me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Because that was exactly what I needed him to do, come back. But this time, he wouldn't be walking into a cabin he thought was his. He'd be walking into a trap I had meticulously prepared over days, nights, and sleepless hours. Preparation became my obsession. By day, I worked remotely on my tech projects, laptop open by the window, creek whispering outside. By night, I schemed. I checked cameras, tested locks, and mapped out every angle of my home. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would stay calm, how I would bait him into showing his true self, not just to me, but to the people who could finally hold him accountable. Sleep became secondary. Meals became afterthoughts. Every ounce of my energy poured into making sure nothing could go wrong. Every scenario I could imagine, every possible reaction of his, I ran through my mind, rehearsed, and planned countermeasures. And then came the waiting. I didn't have to wait long. It was a Friday night. The kind of crisp autumn night that makes the mountains look like they're breathing fire. I sat by the window, reviewing footage from the cameras, the glow of the laptop painting my face pale in the darkness. And then headlights. Truck headlights cutting through the dense trees, illuminating patches of fog drifting along the driveway. My stomach clenched, my pulse surged, but I forced my breathing to stay even, steady, professional. The truck stopped at the edge of my driveway. Ethan climbed out alone, shoulders hunched, movements sloppy, reeking of alcohol. But his eyes, they burned with the same entitlement, the same hunger I had seen all my life. He stomped up to the cabin, banging on the door with his fist, the sound sharp and jarring against the quiet of the valley. "Sarah," he shouted, voice echoing across the mountains. "Open up, this isn't over." I didn't answer. Not a word. Not a hint of movement. He tried the handle. Locked. He pounded harder, swearing under his breath, each word dripping with venom and frustration. "You think you can embarrass me? Kick me out? This is mine too. You owe me." Every threat, every violent bang, every step he took around the perimeter was captured by the cameras I had strategically placed. Every word documented, every motion recorded. He was leaving me the gift of irrefutable proof. I stayed inside, silent, heart hammering, letting it happen. Let him expose himself. Let him prove what he really was. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, He kicked the door hard enough to splinter the frame. The sound exploded in the cabin like a gunshot. My pulse spiked. My hands shook, but I stayed still. Every instinct told me to flee, to react. But I stayed, knowing it was exactly what I needed him to do. The cameras captured it all. Every threat, every aggressive motion, every slurred word, every hand that grabbed, shoved, or threw. And then he made the fatal mistake. He stomped into the loft, the one space I had refused to let him take. He threw open the curtains, spreading his arms wide, shouting into the night as if the world owed him something he had never earned. "This place is mine." "All of it!" Click. The cameras had him. Every angle, every word, every ounce of evidence I needed now secured. I dialed 911 with steady hands, voice calm, deliberate, every syllable measured. "This is Sarah Bennett. I have an intruder in my home. It's my brother. I have video proof of him breaking in. Please send officers immediately." As I hung up, I whispered to myself, barely loud enough to hear over the pounding of my own heart, "Checkmate." The minutes stretched like hours. I watched the cameras, monitoring every movement. When the officers arrived, they didn't need an explanation. The evidence was there, irrefutable. Ethan's entitlement, his rage, his violent intrusion, all caught on tape. He tried to talk his way out, to charm, to manipulate. But the law doesn't care about charm. It only sees facts, and facts, in this case, screamed his guilt. Handcuffs clicked, his protests fading into nothing more than defeated mutters. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. My sanctuary had been defended. My life, finally, belonged to me. Sitting back in my chair, listening to the hum of the police radios outside and the faint rustle of the forest reclaiming its night, I realized something profound. Ethan had thought he could control me, manipulate me, and invade my life at will. But in the end, preparation, patience, and resolve were stronger than entitlement, charm, and aggression. And for the first time, I truly understood what freedom felt like. The minutes between Ethan's forced entry and the sound of approaching sirens stretched into what felt like hours, each second dragging like a weight pressing against my chest. My body remained still, almost statuesque, but my mind buzzed with electricity. Every nerve in me was alive, alert, firing in a way it hadn't in decades. For the first time in my life, I wasn't panicking at Ethan's aggression. No, this time I was waiting. I was waiting for his true self to be exposed, not to me, but to the world outside our fractured family, to witnesses who could finally see him for what he was. The red and blue lights from the police cruisers cut through the dense shadows of the surrounding forest, slicing across the cabin's wooden walls, making them shimmer like fire in the half-light. Ethan was mid-rant in the loft, pacing back and forth like a king atop a crumbling throne. His voice carried through the cabin, a jagged mix of fury and entitlement, echoing against the beams and bouncing off the polished pine floors. The veins in his neck bulged with each shouted syllable, his hands clenching into fists, his bloodshot eyes wild with the kind of anger that comes from entitlement meeting resistance. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, calm, almost eerily so. My breathing was steady, my posture relaxed, unthreatened. Every second I stayed calm was a statement in itself. I was no longer the shadow to his son, the quiet one who tiptoed around his moods, the sister who absorbed all the blame and stress. No. This time, I was ready to watch him crumble under the weight of the consequences he had brought upon himself. "Ethan," I called up, my voice steady, unwavering. "You should stop now." He sneered down at me, his lips curling, eyes wild, bloodshot, almost desperate. "Stop, stop! This is mine, Sarah. I deserve this more than you ever will. You were always the boring one, the little worker bee. I'm the one who's supposed to live big. This cabin, it was meant for me." His words were venomous but hollow. Behind him, the red and blue glow filtered through the curtains, painting him in a surreal, almost theatrical light. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the years of manipulation. The stolen money, the broken trust, the sleepless nights, and I realized there was nothing left to pity. There was only the satisfaction of finally seeing truth and justice meet arrogance head-on. Heavy boots crunched on the porch. The front door swung open, and 2 officers stepped inside, flashlights slicing through the dim cabin. Their presence was commanding, a tangible force of authority that filled the room with immediacy. Relief swept through me, but it was tempered by the anticipation of watching Ethan squirm under the glare of those who could actually hold him accountable. "There," I pointed upward at the loft. "That's him. My brother, he broke in." Ethan froze mid-gesture, his bravado cracking for the first time in what felt like forever. Whoa, officers, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered, bounding down the stairs in a last-ditch attempt at charm. He tried to plaster on that familiar grin, the one that had carried him out of trouble countless times before. "I wasn't breaking in. I was just, checking on my sister. She gets anxious, you know." I was making sure she was okay. I didn't flinch. I simply raised my phone, pulling up the live footage from the hidden cameras. There he was, caught in every frame. His voice, crystal clear, shouting, swearing, kicking in my door, claiming the cabin as his. "This place is mine. All of it!" The officers' expressions hardened instantly. Their eyes narrowed, scanning the footage, scanning him, scanning the room. Every word, every movement, every violent act was there in plain sight. "Sir, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, trespassing and harassment," one officer said firmly, snapping the cuffs onto his wrists before he could utter another excuse. Ethan's face contorted with rage and disbelief. His eyes flickered between the officers, the cameras, and me, trying to calculate a way out that didn't exist. "You think this is over? You think you've won? You're nothing without me, Sarah. Nothing!" His words bounced off the wooden walls of the cabin, absorbed by the beams and the polished floors. For the first time, they had no power. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. His reign of control, his years of manipulation, ended not with a scream, but with silence and the heavy footsteps of authority. The door shut behind him, and the night returned to quiet, save for the creek's eternal murmur outside, a sound that now felt like a hymn celebrating the victory I had carved with my own hands. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, hearings and statements. But unlike before, I wasn't alone. I had evidence, clear, undeniable, irrefutable evidence. Video proof of his aggression, voicemails dripping with threats, a meticulous record of years of harassment and manipulation. Every subtle threat, every lie, every attempt to control me had been cataloged and was now weaponized in my favor. Ethan's charm, the polished lies, the practiced smiles, didn't work in a courtroom. Not when the judge could replay him drunkenly kicking in a door. Not when officers testified to his aggressive behavior and refusal to leave. Not when video evidence captured every word, every violent action. His carefully constructed image crumbled as quickly as he had built it in my mind over decades. Even his friends, the ones who had laughed in my living room weeks earlier, scattered the moment subpoenas were mentioned. Not one of them remained. The network of support he had relied on for so long, the people who had laughed at my expense and enabled his behavior, evaporated under the weight of truth. In the end, the consequences landed like relentless hammers. A restraining order, a hefty fine, a short jail sentence for the break-in. But beyond the legal repercussions, something far more profound occurred. Ethan's reputation, the fragile illusion of power he had depended upon, disintegrated completely. Debts piled higher, old acquaintances distanced themselves. Potential employers Googled his name and recoiled. The man who had always thrived on intimidation and charm was left with nothing but exposure and consequence, and I didn't intervene. I didn't fix him. I didn't apologize. I didn't send explanations or cash or words of comfort. I let him sink, and for the first time, I felt the pure, untainted satisfaction of justice unfolding as it should. Back at the cabin, life slowly returned to the peace I had dreamed of for decades. I replaced the broken doorframe, scrubbed the mud from the rugs, aired out the loft, and polished the floors until they gleamed like they had never gleamed before. Every corner, every surface, every shadow felt wholly mine again. The pines swayed gently in the wind outside. The creek whispered its familiar song over the stones, and I finally exhaled a breath I didn't even know I had been holding for decades. Each time I sat by the window, Gazing out at the mountains and the trees, I felt something I had never felt before. Not just peace, not just safety, but power. Power that came from reclaiming every inch of my life that had been stolen, every moment of control that had been stripped away, every ounce of autonomy that had been denied. For 42 years, Ethan had stolen pieces of me, my time, my money, my confidence, my happiness. And for just as long, I had allowed it. But in that cabin, under the protective shadow of the mountains, I finally drew a line that was no longer invisible or negotiable. And I didn't just draw it. I carved it into stone, permanent and undeniable. Sometimes late at night, when the forest is silent and the moon casts silver shadows across the floors, I replay his final words to me in my mind. "You're nothing without me." And I laugh, because the truth is, I was nothing with him. Without him, I am free. Without him, I am complete, and freedom, I realized, is its own form of revenge. It doesn't have to be loud or violent. It doesn't require traps or theatrics. It's quiet, steady, unyielding. It's living your life on your terms, undaunted, unafraid, unbroken. And that is what I had finally achieved. I reflected on the decades of compromise, silent suffering, and the countless ways I allowed him to dictate the terms of my life. Every stolen opportunity, every manipulated choice, every time I gave him my energy, gone, irretrievable. And yet, sitting in the cabin, the mountain air filling my lungs, I realized that all of it had led me to this moment. The moment where I could finally say enough and have the world respond accordingly. It was a lesson I wanted others to hear. So if you've ever been bullied, manipulated, or drained by someone who thought they owned you, remember this. People like Ethan only have power when you give it to them. You can take it back. You can stand your ground. You can protect your peace. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about asserting control over your life, protecting your boundaries, and finally, allowing yourself to live without fear. When you do, the satisfaction isn't fleeting. It's enduring, a quiet strength that radiates outward and cannot be diminished by others. Looking out at the mountains from my cabin, I knew I had done more than defend my property. I had defended my dignity, my freedom, and my very essence. In the process, I had built a life where no one, not even my own brother, could take it from me. I smiled, sipping my tea as the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting a warm golden glow across the valley. Life would go on. The creek would continue to murmur. The pines would sway, and the wind would carry the scent of freedom through the air. And for the first time, I felt truly safe, not just from him, but from the idea that anyone could control me again. Not just from the past, but from the fear that had haunted me for decades. I was no longer a victim. I was a force. I was my own protector, my own authority, my own line in the sand. And in that truth, I found a power far greater than any court order, any arrest, or any confrontation could provide. The mountains outside stood silent and eternal, bearing witness to a victory that had been long in the making, and in that silence, I finally exhaled, releasing the weight of 42 years of manipulation, control, and oppression. I had won, not through brute force, not through anger, but through patience, planning, and steadfast resolve. So if you've ever been bullied, manipulated, or drained by someone who thought they owned you, remember this. People like Ethan only have power when you give it to them. Take it back. Stand your ground. Protect your peace. Because sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about reclaiming yourself. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps more people hear stories like this. Subscribe if you want more true tales of justice, revenge, and standing up to those who try to steal your peace. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to finally stand up to someone who thought they could walk all over you? I'd love to hear your story.